Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst John Sneisen. We are going to get into something very big today because of course we all know, and it's surrounded us this whole year, the cult of Covidian, the Covidian cult, the status cult of the brainwashing, the absolute destruction of the most basic freedoms worldwide, and we have to trace back who benefits. And of course, the government benefits, big pharma institutions benefit, the United Nations benefit, but exactly what people benefit. And we see these very strange recurring stories of the IMF attempting to bribe politicians worldwide in Tanzania and, of course, in Belarus to enforce these crazy lockdowns, which really tells you that there's obviously some manipulation at play here, and that goes without saying. I think we all know that, and I believe that's very connected to technocratic China, but there's more to it than just the IMF, and we're going to get into that later in this video. But first, I just want to mention the headlines of a few articles that I find very interesting, like this one. Belarusian president claims IMF and World Bank offered him a bribe to impose COVID restrictions. And a lot of us have been hearing about that. Of course, they did not lock down like other countries. They just restricted travel from other countries into Belarus. And of course, we have articles like this one. IMF refuses to allocate $940 million to Belarus amid COVID-19 pandemic. Well, that's about the same amount of money that the Belarusian president says that the IMF tried to bribe him with. And I have no doubt that this is true. We found out right after, because he only has everything to lose. He has nothing to gain by doing this and saying this. He could be a lot more successful as a country and get way more funding if he goes along with the narrative, but he hasn't. And as this article out of AlJazeera.com says, Lukashenko accuses NATO of hatching aggressive plans on Belarus, and they've said that they haven't been, but according to Belarus, NATO has been aggressing against them around their borders, and it makes sense because he says they're trying to use them as a piece of the puzzle with Russia to try and aggress against Russia and cause more conflicts in the region, which of course he does not want. It doesn't look good when a country like Belarus, which by the way isn't the most rich country in the world by far, is facing, possible military intervention.
Yeah, no, and he's a big dictator too. But
there's no good politicians out there. But with that said, you also don't want the international community coming in and causing war in your country. So anyway, we're going to get into this and more because the IMF's interference in these countries is really suspect, especially considering their connection, obviously, with the United Nations and the World Health Organization, and then China, and then Africa, and all those, and the communism and technocracy and Bill Gates and so on and so forth. So we're going to get into that and more today. But first, make sure to hit that like button and check those links below and join us and keep joining us on things like BitChute, LBRY/Odysee, as well as Flote.app, as we have been completely wiped off of YouTube and deleted. And of course, any way you guys can fund us is great because we are 100% viewer funded. So GoFundMe, Patreon, Subscribestar, Bitcoin, our crypto, our CoinTree address in the links below, which brings you to all the other cryptocurrencies, our Teespring store, and join our newsletter at www.imband.com, and go over to Twitter at @WorldAltMedia and retweet our pinned tweet about being deleted and help put pressure on Team YouTube. Anyway, let's get into this, John. So what do you think of the interference of the IMF worldwide and the real players behind the doors, in the shadows, lurking and always trying to enslave humanity in any way they can, or possibly drive us against each other? What do you think of this agenda?
But I just think they're following their textbook, Josh, which is, the IMF is, give a loan to a state with, totalitarian leaders or very corrupt, politicians. Mm-hmm. And then what you end up doing is, over time, they take all the money and then you just steal their infrastructure as collateral for the loan that is never going to ever get paid back by the country itself. Now, it was John Perkins, the economic hitman. He talked about, this strategy, which is, very much in play right in front of us, at least, political leaders finally talking about it, and a couple, because they're probably getting sick and tired of getting pushed around by this, world global organization that, the IMF is. It's just a loan shark that's out there that's, giving money to desperate nations, and then they steal from them at the back end and steal from the people itself, all the resources in the country and all the infrastructure and so on. and take control over it, so the people have no benefits whatsoever from it. And that's of course the strategy of the IMF, and it's been ever since 1967 when they was seed funded by the U.S. Exchange Stabilization Fund and other member states that initially started it up. So there's no doubt there, and of course now the IMF is like, it's just interesting how these big organizations in the UN is coming out like these basically government organizations. We've talked about the IMF in great detail before, and you should look at those videos because we go into the governance structure, which is basically set up as a government itself, just on a global basis.
Those videos are still backed up on LBRY/Odysee, by the way, so you can find them there. Yeah,
exactly. So you really need to take a look at that, and what is really happening with the IMF is they're pushing. They have their own agendas to empower nations and then steal from them. Then it's interesting. You have NATO there, of course. It's not really part of the UN, but it's really like a part of the big global conglomerate. They're trying to corner Russia and take over all these former Soviet republics, and wanting to have them part. They got into Croatia just recently, so it's big push between Croatia and Serbia. You're down there right now, and the former Yugoslav republics there. So that is another organization that is interesting, with a second organization that is called IATA, the International Air and Travel Association. I forgot exactly what it stands for, but it's for the air travel in the world. In March, Josh, way before this became a crisis at all, they sent out an email. I'm on their newsletter. They sent an email and said that they were calling for a vaccination passport at the time. And well, look at where we are now. They're coming out with the vaccination documents now in Australia.
Well, John, they were talking about. They were talking about connecting that to the ID 2020 thing worldwide, which of course most people already have on their driver's license and stuff like that. But they were talking about connecting it back then. And I remember at that time saying, before COVID happened, I want to get out of the U.S. and go to one of these other countries before that happens. And then COVID happened, and it was like, oh, it became a giant prison planet.
Oh, exactly. That's where we're at. And of course, as the IMF is kind of a dying organization in itself, because the totalitarians doesn't like it, because there's too much democracy there for them, where there's like 157 member states. Don't get me, I don't remember the exact number of nations that are part of the IMF, but what they said is they actually created in 2008, the G20 nations created another organizations with the Bank of International Settlements called the FSB, which is funny because that's what the Russian secret police is called as well. Mm-hmm. But it's called the Financial Stability Board, and it was actually it started with a Goldman Sachs guy, Mario Draghi, back in the early 90s, where I think he started it, and it was called the Financial Stability Forum, which was basically they tried to put together less and less people to make decisions for more and more countries' central banks. And so actually the one of the guys that wrote a book, which is very interesting, that everybody should pick up. It's a little expensive, but it's called the redesign of the global financial infrastructure, the return of state authority. In this book, it was talked about how the IMF is way too many cooks in the kitchen, and they can't get nothing done. So we need a more totalitarian organization. And they were talking about how it needs to be run by these technocrats, at the central banks, and it's run by about 20 people that are sitting and actually making laws for all the central banks in the world right now. Even the Federal Reserve that supposedly got nationalized, talking about the Q movement and all that funny stuff, they actually put up the legislations of central bank digital currencies. They actually advise and put forward legislation that the local central banks can put in. So they've been very, very busy lately. I rarely got anything over the last in 2019. I got very little. I just added myself onto the newsletter. But suddenly now, over the last couple of days, there's just been a mass amount of messages going out about central bank digital currency, how to implement that. tax control cooperation grids. Like we talked about this before, the base erosion and profit shifting project between all the nations. And then, of course, the cryptocurrency legislation to try to legalize, a lot of these cryptocurrencies in different countries and how they can do it. And they're getting ready to clamp down on everything. They're getting ready for a massive reset. And at the actual latest meeting this weekend, Josh, I forgot her name. I think it's I forgot her first name, but it's Georgieva. I think her name is, the new head of the IMF. She actually called for a Bretton Woods moment. And for those that are not aware of what the Bretton Woods moment was, well, it was basically a reset of the global financial infrastructure. So we're getting very close. Like she was talking about maybe 2021. So I think they're going to keep this going, Josh, and this scam, trying to get into more countries and do this garbage, behavior, which, that they're known for. They called for that. They needed $3 trillion to stop climate change. These guys are, they think we're stupid, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because I was in Bretton Woods earlier this year in New Hampshire, which, by the way, is just like a couple minutes away from Fabian, famous town as well in New Hampshire. Very creepy place. Something seems weird about the place. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe it's all the old Victorian houses. But look, what the plan going forward, of course, is cashless. We're thinking of, we've talked about technocracy for years, and a lot of people say I'm like picking on China. It's not necessarily just China. It's just the model that they're using China as an example for, where of course the US government and many of the global entities have been working with China for a long time, and China has a huge influence on Africa. They've taken over most of Africa. And then look at, for example, Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization, who's one of the heads of the communist parties, or was one of the heads of the communist parties in Ethiopia, which was heavily taken over by China. I've been to Africa, I should say, and you could see Chinese influence everywhere. And then you could say the same about the IMF, who years ago, Lagarde, when she was the head of the IMF, was saying she wanted to see the IMF's headquarters based in Beijing. And this has been a motive for a long time, because they can use this kind of puppet system, social credit, to enforce vaccinations. They could use it to stop people from getting bank accounts and track people everywhere. This is absolutely serious and absolutely dangerous going forward.
Yeah, actually, China got sick and tired of being a part of the IMF, because the US, of course, has veto rights in the IMF with their voting power. So they created their own, called the Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank, the AIIB. And there's tons of members there too, except for the United States, of course. They're not a member there, funny enough.
Well, we could probably see that replace the IMF in the future, because it really seems like we're going in the direction of just replacing all the old systems with a new system that seems new and progressive, but really is just an excuse for technocracy worldwide. And I'm really concerned about that, especially also with the FSB. So going forward, John, how do you think they're going to be able to arrange this empire in a way that'll benefit the elites and hurt the populace as much as possible?
Well, I think the thing is, like, they're using IMF over here. Everybody's looking at the IMF. Nobody's talking about the Financial Stability Board, which is, total totalitarianism. And so nobody is focusing on that. No people are, aware of that they are the ones making all the laws for the accounting, the insurance, the banking, and the securities in the world. And so I think they're just going to keep on, dangling. It's like you said it before, dangling keys in front of a kid. Meanwhile, they're doing something over here a lot more sinister. So I think they're just going to keep on pushing that agenda. They really want the UN and have the IMF as the central bank, of course, digital currency, the SDR there. But we're never going to touch that SDR. They're going to actually implement, and they really started to get forward now. There was actually, Jerome Powell just said that they are not looking at, right away setting up a digital currency. But haven't we heard that before, Josh? When any central banker says something, you should do the total. You should be aware of the total opposite.
Keep in mind, John, that Janet Yellen said last year there will not be another financial crisis in her lifetime. Jerome Powell said at the beginning of this year that interest rates will not move in 2020. They often do the exact opposite of what they say. We can look back at Ben Bernanke, of course, as well, saying that in 2007 that the economy is just great and nothing bad's going to happen to it. It's going to be sunny days going forward. Literally the opposite of everything they do is probably the best thing to do. And when I confronted, I shouldn't say confront, I interviewed Stephen Moore last year in July about interest rates. He was one of the top advisors to Trump on the economy. And it was hilarious because everything I said would happen to him ended up happening. Everything he said would happen, the opposite happened. And it really goes to show that you don't need a degree in this day and age. You just need to have a little bit of common sense and a little bit of time spent in, actually researching this stuff. But John, as we close this off, final words, we're going to have to get into this subject more in future videos because there's so much to talk about regarding the IMF and the FSB and all these entities, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which I know we've done extensive videos on before.
Which is now massively used. Yeah, which is now used as a massive bailout platform right now by the Treasury, like that the U.S. taxpayers hold for as well. So no, there's lots of these organizations everywhere, Josh. But what we need to be aware of is we need to have our eyes open. We can't let the World Health, like, why are we listening to the World Health Organization, one of the most corrupt organizations in the world? Not only was Tedros a communist leader back in his own country, but he also worked for Gavi, which is the global not anti-vaccination institution, but it's Bill Gates charitable organization that they push for a global vaccinations of everybody. So it's interesting how these people park themselves. Fauci has also been a part of that. So all these people are globalists that are working for the big billionaires that want global power, especially the health expert Bill Gates over there. So we got to be aware of that. We can't listen to these people because they've been high on power. When you give people power, they just get more and more higher on that power, and then just become more totalitarian, more crazy, and thinking that they are the god on earth. And so there's just because like this happened in the past, and people think that these people have it under control this time. Like, no, the human behavior is the same every single time, and they tend to if you create those institutions that have mass amounts of power, like the United Nations and their government subsidiaries, you will have people levitate to those positions that are insane power hungry people. Like the guy who's in charge of the EU, Jean-Claude Juncker, the heir to the Juncker bombers and the family that created those for Hitler. And so you have people that want total control over people. They will levitate to those positions, and they will create total control over people over time. It's just if you think that the conservative government or anybody else will do anything different, well, look at Manitoba. They implemented the Ministry of Sustainable Development during conservative government. If people believe
and raise taxes,
people believe still in this voting agenda on the left-right paradigm and stuck in that, you better have a serious reality check, because you're in, especially now with COVID, they have so many plans of total destruction of society with extreme totalitarian measures that if we don't stand up now and if we don't push these ideas forward and educate people, it's going to be game over, and you're going to live in a little slave pen in a tiny little apartment in a big massive city if they get what they want out of it. So if we don't stand up, Josh, we might as well just die and live in, or just live slaves forever on the plantation earth.
Absolutely. On this prison planet, the real prison is in the mind, my friends, and that prison in the mind is fear, and that fear leads to subservience, and that subservience leads to absolute enslavement. And we need to break free. We need to live by example. We need to disobey what we're being told, because we know, think of it this way. Is the mainstream media wrong, or is independent media wrong? Let me look at it this way. So the independent medias talk about these things and know that they get their livelihoods destroyed by talking about it. They have nothing to gain and everything to lose. Meanwhile, the mainstream medias get billions of dollars from the big pharma institutions, all these major pharmaceutical companies.
Or the government bails them out.
And I wonder who benefits the most from lying. Definitely the mainstream media. And so who are you going to trust? The guys who are getting paid billions of dollars to say this narrative that puts people in chains? Or are you going to believe the people who are fighting every single day to free the information and free the minds of the public at very great risk to themselves and bankrupting themselves, like myself and like John, and all of us in independent media that are just trying to bring the truth forward. That's why they're deleting us, because it's not that they're, what we're saying is wrong. They cut off our tongue because they fear what we may say, and we must completely insist that we continue saying what we're saying and break free from the chains that so many people revere. The whole thing's a fraud. Fauci is the head of the Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases, which got millions of dollars in grants from the U.S. government to study coronavirus in bats in China. That's 96% similar to COVID-19, the novel coronavirus. And the whole point of the study was how to spread it to humans. And in doing that, then they get a ton of funding. They screw up the whole entire world. 28 million people facing homelessness. 81% of independent restaurants are about to go under. I mean, this is absolute terrorism. It's tyranny, and we have to stand up now. And if we don't stand up now, we must forever hold our peace and go down with the ship.
Yeah, let me just finish with this. This is a quote from a colleague of mine, which is a part business owner with the guy I work for. He's from Bosnia, and what he told me, I had a good conversation with him. He's like, why isn't anybody preparing and having weapons or food or precious metals here in Canada? Says, because we're starting to look more and more like the former Yugoslav republics before the chaos hit like SHTF shit hit the fan over there in Yugoslavia when the wars broke out. So warnings from where you are, Josh, is that we're running towards the same exact destruction that they had over there, and if we don't take heed and prepare ourselves, we'd be very doomed.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been so duped. Anyway, I appreciate you going into this with us, John. And make sure to hit that like button. Check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon, subscribe. There's Bitcoin. There's the CoinTree link below, which shows all of our different cryptocurrency addresses. And of course, you can join our newsletter at www.imband.com. We have a Teespring merchandise store. You can get John's books at Amazon at The End of Freedom, How Our Monetary System Enslaves Us, as well as Canada, the Greatest Country in the World, ? Which
and check out theeconomictruth.org as well.
Absolutely. And of course, finishing it off, go to Twitter to our World Alt Media page, the pinned tweet at the top, retweet it about us being deleted, and message Team YouTube about our channel being taken down. Anyway, we'll be back with you guys with much more. We got some huge guests coming up that we're going to keep secret for now, but just wait. It's going to blow the lid off of a lot of this stuff. So until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Snyson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth. Be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.